Welcome back to my channel where I'm building a RANS S21 plane. First I'll mention that I do have a second engine on order with RANS. It's a long story, but I am selling that motor if anyone's interested. I've listed it a couple times on the forum and Barnstormers. Haven't gotten any takers, which kind of surprised me. The delivery date on it is about December, and I'm selling it for $7,000 or so, less than the current pricing if you were to order one today. So it's a good deal, and it's only 6 months out from now. So let me know if you're interested. Also, there's a lot of talk about Oshkosh. It looks like a lot of 21 builders are going. Some 21s themselves will be flying. And I'm going to try and make it there and hopefully touch bases with a lot of you. So I hope to see you there. In this episode, I put on the fuel servo, attached to fuel servo. I install the mixture and throttle control cables. And then I start the video with putting the optional jack lugs on the wheels. So with that, let's jump into building. I'm going to take a break from the motor for a little bit. I purchased the optional jack lug set, and these are just some lugs that go on to the axle or below the axle of the wheel. If you need to jack your plane up, it gives you a firm place to place the jack. You can kind of see the design here, that it just goes behind the gear leg and gives you a place for a jack. I've often thought about if I have to change a tire in the rough or in the outdoors, how am I going to do it? There really was nothing or no place to put a jack before. Even now, as I'm putting this on, I'm figuring, how do I jack up a side of my plane? So I came up with a process here. So I'm going to get the plane jacked up using this contraption, and then I'll get my lug on down here. Well, the jack lugs are on. They're a great addition, and if you are a new builder or haven't gotten to this point, I would definitely order them. Trying to jack the plane up without those is really hard. There's no place to put a jack under there. The only option really was underneath this, but you'll have a fairing over that later. And then you've got quite a distance to the ground to get your jack up, so you've got to have something, you know, a wood brace or some type of step or something to get your jack up that high. So I would recommend these if you haven't bought them already. It was a little bit more difficult than I had planned. I had forgotten when I put these wheels on that there's only 3 of the nuts that come off that bring the tire off. The other 3 actually hold your wheels together, you know, the 2 halves of the wheel. So I've actually put a little mark there, a little orange mark, to remind myself that you only need to take those 3 off and the wheel comes off. And the other 3, if you loosen them up, you got to get a wrench behind them or an Allen wrench to tighten them back up. And you don't want your rims to split because those are holding your seam together and everything else. If you split that rim, you're all over resetting your tire again. So, and it also involved splitting the brake calipers in order to get the wheel off and everything. It was just more than I had bargained for. I thought it was just going to be replaced in a bolt. But they're on, and I'm glad they're on, and we'll move on. Okay, I'm going to skip around a little bit while I'm waiting for some parts. I'm going to tackle installing the fuel servo. This came, I'm pretty sure it came with a motor. Yeah, it was part of the parts that came with a motor. The fuel servo. There's some bolts that have to get changed out apparently. This is a bracket, I think, for the mixture and throttle control. Some miscellaneous gaskets. Text page 1116. Parts pages 11F01 and 02. And then a diagrams page where we're going to fabricate some brackets. So we will start with fabricating the brackets. That's where we start in the text. The bracket material comes in a small bag. It's a pretty thick piece of angle bracket. Looks like you're going to make 2 of them, and they're going to be 1 1/4 inches in length. And then there's some specific requirements as far as where you drill these holes. Okay, it looks like there's 1 angle that's going to go down here, and there's 2 bolts that go through, but you're only drilling 1 hole. But as you get further down, you're going to transfer drill the second one later. And it does say to fabricate 2, but this is only showing 1, so I'm assuming the other one is going to come into play later. So I'm just going to put that aside and hope I'm understanding this. So I've marked the hole 0.375 inches in and 1/4 inch down. So I think that's the mark. And then we're going to attach it to the control mount. Okay, it says to attach this, and you're with only one, the pre-drilled number 11, not to drill up the second one as I mentioned. And they're not labeling these down here. I'm assuming this is the 3/16 thin washer, and this is the 3/16 shear nut, which is how you've attached almost all the AN bolts before. So I'll just make that assumption, attach it, and then you're going to attach this part of the assembly. The next step, I guess, is to get this underneath and figure out the direction. It's kind of a Rubik's Cube trying to figure out which direction. So this is forward, and then this bar goes back closest to the firewall. So I'm test fitting it right now. I haven't taken off this spacer or anything. I'm just test fitting it. So I believe it goes in like this. This is looking back at my firewall. And so it looks like this. It says to remove the 3 screws and replace them with longer ones. This one looks like the one that stays, and these on the right and the back looks like they get replaced with the longer ones. The best way I've seen to take these out is to attach 2 of the nuts and then tighten this top one down to the bottom one, and then all you have to do is spin this top one and the whole bolt will come out. Okay, I'm going to video what I did to get these bolts out of here. So much for the easy peasy, just put 2 nuts together. These guys were in here so friggin', I tried to put a pipe wrench around here, I tried vice grips, this double nut thing, my nuts kept sliding. So what I ended up doing is after I tightened these 2 nuts together, I took a socket wrench and I held the bottom nut and gave it a little less pressure than I was giving my upper nut and really forced the 2. And finally this started to turn, and I've now got it out. But it took a lot of finagling with these 2 wrenches to get the pressure right on it and to get it out. But it came out. In replacing these fuel servo engine bolts, thanks to Derek Kenny, who pointed out that the 2 ends are not identical. The thread length at the top is a little longer, and at the top there's a little cone shape on both the one that came out and the new one, more so than on the bottom. So it looks like they go in a specific way. I'm not sure the purpose of this little cone, but I'm going to put it back the same way that the old one came out. Also, as far as how far to screw them in, I've seen some dialogue on that. This is the width of that control bracket, or the mixture throttle control mount that's going to go on that requires the extended bolt. So I'm assuming that's the extra distance that we need. So when I install them, I'm going to sink them down. It's not going to be the exact same spot, but I'm going to sink it down to where I have just about that much, if not just a hair more, maybe a thread turn more than that distance, because that should be exactly what you need. Now that we've got those engine bolts in, we're going to attach the spacers, the gaskets, and the fuel servo. And this gets attached, but you leave these bolts loose, because I guess you're going to line this up with the throttle cable and the mixture cable when it comes in before you tighten them down. And you're not going to match drill this, again, until you set it. So it looks like we attach it all to the bottom of the motor, and then we'll final fit this. Another head scratcher, and I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. In attaching the fuel servo, it shows gasket, spacer, gasket, top of fuel servo, and then your mount arm. What came with the engine was this gasket was against the engine, then this spacer, then this gasket with these washers in the corner. But if I try and install the servo with these washers, it leaves a gap. I don't know why there's washers here. And then these two washers were in the supply, and they look an awful lot like fuel servo washers. So, and this spacer came with a motor. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go gasket, spacer, gasket. I'm going to use these two gaskets, this spacer, and I'm not going to use these that were on the motor when I got it. It doesn't say anything about existing gaskets, so it clearly just says gasket, spacer, gasket goes up on the motor. So that's what I'm going to do, unless I hear otherwise from the forum. So that bolted on pretty easily. And I've got a bracket here. These are still adjustable because they're not tight. So as the cables come through, I'll be able to adjust it. And then we still have to match drill that after the cables come through. But this is attached using the spacer and the two gaskets. My next step is to work on the throttle and mixture cables. They tell you to modify the eyeball firewall fittings by drilling the center hole to 19/64. So I guess the current hole is too small. So these are these eyeball settings that are back up in there. And they're kind of back in here. So we're going to have to get those out, modify them, and get these cables run. And I believe they're going to run through the back of the, let's see if I can get this, the back of these brackets up here. These are the ones we made with the angles, one for the throttle and one for the mixture. And then I assume they go on to the appropriate brackets. I went out and I got a 19/64 bit, not the highest quality, but that's not a real common bit. They only had one in all of Home Depot, so got that. It's a fresh bit, so I need to get that out to a 9/16, or I'm sorry, 19/64. I started with the mixture cable. I set it through my sub panel, and as I got about here, I slid on my nuts necessary, nuts and washer to tighten up in there, as well as the nut for the eyeball down here. Then slid the cable all the way through. And I did use the bottom hole for the mixture, which seems to work coming under this fuel pump. And I just ran it down here. It's still loose at this point. And I put the ends on and just temporarily set this up loosely. And then played with the length of the cable. You can kind of push the cable back into the sub panel and kind of get the distance straight. Okay, now that I've got this set where I want it, this is going to slide in here. Remember, we haven't finished match drilling this, so I've got to match drill it out to the other 3/16 and tighten everything down. And then this gets wire tied in. I would imagine I've got to widen this so this goes inside, is what I'm thinking, but I'll check. And then we'll just reattach this up to the mixture controls arm. I've installed the throttle cable now, using the same process through the firewall and those eye nuts. Two comments, and I think others have said it. This cable is a little too long, the throttle cable. In order to get it into the proper location, you have to create some fearless, kind of a swirly motion, puts a little tension on it. And then when you go to fasten your brackets down, the angle that this is best suited doesn't give you enough metal over here on this angle bracket. So you got to offset it just a little bit. I think I saw Tony from S21 Project. He actually created a new bracket where he drilled the hole, instead of near the end, he drilled it more towards the middle so that when you rotate it, you had enough aluminum over here to grab. And then the next thing is, this is in the forward, all the way forward position. Here's your throttle all the way forward, your throttle all the way back. So in order to set this, this crank handle gets adjusted. See, you can see some teeth in here where it's great. You just take this cotter pin out, loosen this nut, change the position on this, clamp it back into the teeth here, and put the nut and the cotter pin back on. So there's a little bit of adjustment necessary for this cable length, but not that difficult. I've set it in there with enough to grab, and it's, in my opinion, the angle's okay. perfect, maybe a little bit more, but the angle's okay. Well, that's a good place to stop. Kind of a short section for this episode. But next time we will work on the airbox and also get some of the engine sensors hooked up and wired, and we'll look forward to that. But with that, thanks very much for watching, and just remember, dream it and just build it.